Thank you. How do you follow a gentleman who's come up and spoken about 100,000 crores at his disposal for the next 5 years and being able to distribute that to the research and startup ecosystem? And this is how. With the two gentlemen next to me who've not just created deep tech products, but actually scaled their businesses magnificently over the last, I think, 7 to 8 years that they have been around. And so today's panel, I'm guessing you heard a lot, this being a deep tech session about products and building innovative technology and so on. But I think the real key is not just building technology and the challenges lie after that, which is how do you take it to market? What are the ways in which you do that? What are the decision points that you'll reach, the obstacles, hurdles, friction points, and so on? And so the idea is to hear it from these two gentlemen. Daniel, of course, from DeepTech, part of our portfolio at Bharat Innovation Fund. Shibam from Atomberg. I wish he was part of our portfolio at Bharat Innovation Fund. We spoke a lot, didn't end up investing finally, but he's moved at the rate of knots as well. And let me start with Shibam. Shibam, I think almost every investor I speak to who'd spoken to you back then tells me two things, right? One is, I wish I had invested in Atomberg, the ones that who had it. And then the second is that I've got an Atomberg fan in my house. I didn't invest, but I'm a consumer, right? And when we spoke, I remember in the space of 3 months, you were doing 4 crores a month. In 3 months or 4 months, you moved to 8 crores a month. And now you've topped 100 crores a month is what I heard from you. Going back in time. Yeah, he deserves that. Going back in time, there was a point in time, I remember when we were chatting, when you were thinking of going the consumer way, a B2C model, was you were also selling to enterprises, right? Corporates, government offices, as enterprise customers. And somewhere it looks like it's gone a little bit more on the consumer direction now than enterprise. Can you talk about what made you arrive at that decision and how you doubled down more on the consumer space, and a little bit more about having taken that decision, what were the challenges you encountered in B2C and how you overcame them? What were the good parts of it as well?
No, thank you so much, Ashwin, for having me here. It's a privilege. To answer the question, probably I'll just give you 2 minutes brief on how we started. So if you look at Atomberg, we started in 2012. And we did not start with ceiling fan or consumer durable. We start with products like data acquisition system, products like vehicle tracking system, which is like completely different from what we are doing today. But why I'm saying this, because if you look at our DNA from 2012 to 2015 or the beginning, it was always an engineering DNA and not a consumer DNA or a product DNA, right? Then in 2015, we started working on this BLDC motor, and we chose fan as the first application, right? Since the proposition was energy efficiency, so naturally it made sense to target those clients who has a lot of fans, essentially B2B clients who are like 1,000, 2,000 fans who can save in around 10, 15 lakhs a year. Now, 2 decisions we had to take at that point in time. One decision is, within the fan space or durable space, do you continue to serve B2B clients or you move to consumer? And the other decision to make is, do you even do this consumer business or just make the motor and be a technology business and just sell to other companies, right? So 2 decisions we had to make in 2016. Now, the first decision of saying that from B2B to B2C, I think was quite simple. It's not very complicated. Because if you look at the overall market, the B2B market was less than 10%, right? So if we wanted to become large, we'll have to be in the large market. So we decided that, irrespective of who the early adopters are, we'll have to play the larger games. We'll have to be in the consumer sector anyway. I think that decision was easy. What was tricky is, we back then didn't have any knowledge or understanding of how a consumer brand, gets built, right? We didn't know anything about distribution. We didn't know anything about product. We knew about technology, but not product. We didn't know anything about brand building. So yeah, it was all a very difficult choice. At the same time, when we thought about how do we build this B2B business, right? So the only way you can build a B2B business is that you have a range of motors. You go to different target segments and approach them. We tried that, right? So we thought, we have a motor, let's go and approach the fan makers and say that, you take our motor, you sell in your brand name. But what we realized is that, the BLDC market back then was less than 1%, and the incumbents were not interested in, making it large, right? So it was very hard for us to scale that business up. And on the same time, the consumer business, we started learning. We started learning digital, we started learning product, people started liking the product, right? We thought, then let's do one thing, let's try to build a consumer business, right? But I remember in every investor deck, from there till 2024, 2023, we always had this one slide where we said that, we are a consumer business, but our DNA is engineering, and at some point in time, we'll expand to these engineering businesses, right? So we had this in 2017, 2018, 2020, we raised 3-4 rounds of capital. Eventually in 2023, we now have our own manufacturing business as well as a part of subsidiary, right? So to answer the question, we did not choose A or B, we just prioritized A over B. And for us, it was consumer because it was very difficult to choose the B2B path due to the restriction and the resistance from the brands. So, yeah, so that's how we started this business.
And a quick follow-on to that, which is also the dealers, distributors, retailers, right? Every time, and when we spoke during our diligence to them, and even others, I've heard from other funds who have spoken to every one of your distributors, I think they've chosen to push your fan, right? They've been fans of your fan, ceiling fan, and put it out there. And I'm sure there were challenges in establishing this whole, to the customer type of route. What were those that you faced, and how did you crack that early, given your incumbent startup, very small if you think of your, the other competitors at that point of time, the Bajajes, the Havels, and what have you. You cracked it pretty quickly. What do you think helped you do that?
Yeah, talking about challenges, I don't know where to start. There were many. Yeah, of course, distribution was a challenging startup, but I think beyond distribution, let me just quickly share what else we faced challenge, and then how that eventually we entered the distribution business, right? See, back in 2016, saying that we will build a hardware business was hard, right? I remember meeting so many investors, including you, and we went to various IC stage, and we couldn't convince the IC, saying that, why we can actually build this consumer brand, right? So convincing investors, convincing other people, saying that, we can build a brand and fight with incumbents so large balance sheet, at that point in time was tough, right? The only thing that was working in our favor was that, we were doing a digital-led distribution, right? But we were not happy, right? What we did is that 2017, we realized that we'll have to move to offline. And the moment we said, we'll go offline, again the investor had the same issue that, how will you go and build this offline distribution? So yeah, I think challenges were many. Within that, if I say offline distribution crack is probably one of the top 2 or 3 challenges, along with building manufacturing and building supply chain. Now, I remember in 2017 in Bombay, I probably visited one day started visiting 8-10 counters. I thought we'll probably go and come back with 2-3 counters placements. It didn't happen like that way, right? The counter did not entertain us. It took us almost 7-8 months to even have the first counter placement, right? Then we realized that cracking distribution is probably one of the toughest nut we can think of, right? Now just imagine this way, there are hardly 3-4 brands. You do not have a brand pool. You do not have a relationship. You don't know the counters, right? There is no reason why they will keep your product. So how we did is that we realized to crack this entire circle, we'll have to take one thing at a time. So we thought, let's buy the relationship. The only way to buy the relationship to have on-ground people from the competitions. But that gave an opportunity to play and talk with the counters, right? Then we said, okay, we have a B2B business, right? Can we use that B2B business to have a sellout from the counters? We took a hit on margin and ensured that whatever counter we placed, instead of sell in, we pushed on sell out, right? It took some time, right? And then we figured out that okay, in Bombay, we're getting some tractions. Then we leveraged our digital, right? We leveraged it a lot. We realized a very interesting insight, which is very common nowadays anyway, that consumer journey never happens on one channel or other channel. It always a mix, right? You will discover somewhere and sell happens somewhere, right? So we realized that in digitally, we are getting a lot of inbound inquiries about the product and the technology, right? So we made sure that we did not sell a single product through our own website. We ensured that everything is sold through that counters, right? So instead of sell in, from day one, we focused on sell out. So if I place one product in a counter, can I sell the one in a month? That was the thought process, right? And eventually, slowly and steadily, then it started picking up. Now I think if I look at 2018, probably the first counter we cracked. Then we raised the first series around. Now, 8 years from now, I think the offline business will do around 800 crore this year, right? So it just scaled up like this. But I mean, it's not. I mean, it looks like 3 years journey, but it's actually an 8 years journey. Whether every single day you learn something and something and something.
Yeah. So sell out over sell in, I think, and for founders building hardware startups and saying it's hard, and investors saying you can't scale hardware in India. I mean, here's a classic example of somebody who's built a hardware business and scaling rapidly. But let me move to Daniel. Of course, Atomberg, DeepTech, built in India for India predominantly at this point in time. And let's talk to someone who's building a business which is DeepTech from India but for global markets. And rather than the consumer market, seems to have chosen more the enterprise market itself. So Daniel, maybe you want to just describe your product a little bit to start with, and then talk about that decision, right? You have a bunch of Indian customers, and you also started getting a ton of international customers. So talk us through the decision about geographically, do you address India market, US market, where do you put the fuel at what point in time, and how you arrived at that over time? But perhaps a little bit about your product.
Sure, no. Thanks for the question, Ashwin. So I think to start off with, for those of you that don't know us, I'll describe. And I think the best way to go through it is by going through the story itself. So we as DeepTech, our overall mission is to make the industrial world a safer and more efficient place through actionable artificial intelligence, right? Actionable being the key word. But we didn't have such a very clear mission back then when we started. I would say we incorporated as a company back in 2016, but we were working on the pieces of technology since 2013 or so, right? So getting into the story, we had a patent for the first sensor in the world that could generate signals through metal piping at high temperatures. And why this is important is, I'm sure almost everyone in the audience would have done an ultrasound before. And ultrasounds, you have the ultrasound sensor, the doctor applies a gel, and that gel is applied so that the signal can flow through into your body, and it is to match what is called impedance. Now, if you look at large chemical or oil and gas infrastructures, their piping and critical piping operates at anything about 200 degrees Celsius. These gels become unstable at that temperature. So as a result, the ultrasonic technology doesn't work. These facilities have to shut down for you to perform maintenance activities, and every day of shutdown is worth $2 million of losses. So since we had the patent, we understood that if we productize this can be a technology that you can apply on high temperature piping and generate signals for long ranges at high temperatures, and you can monitor infrastructure in real time without having to take shutdowns for no reason at your facilities, right? Thereby improving the efficiency of your sites, the energy output of these sites for the rest of the country, which conceptually was great as a technology and as a use case. But over time, when we developed and productized this in 2016, we, in a way, I think going back to what Sibabrata shared as well, we were engineers working on multiple problem statements. So we built drone-based technologies out of IIT as well. We built analytics that could evaluate both the sensor as well as the drone-based technology. So it was a range of technologies that we were taking to market. And this exposed the industries to us. So we first started working with a massive enterprise customer in the form of Reliance and started scaling across the Indian ecosystem. But there we saw that to prove that the technology works, the corrosion process is an extremely slow process. So for you to install one sensor and then prove that there is value will take another 7 to 8 months to be able to prove that to the customer, which then led to us as innovators building more suites of technology. we realized over time that our moat ended up being the amount of data that we were accumulating, the data scientists that were working on the information from sensors as well as drones and fixed cameras, and eventually ended up building an AI system that could plug into cameras and monitor unsafe actions, inspection-related activities, and operational inefficiencies in real time, right? And we chanced upon this as a use case, and for you to be able to prove it, you can prove it within 10 to 15 days, right? And that's how, through a suite of building technologies, we started scaling this across. I met you, Ashwin, I think early in the journey in a conference setup like this. I think I chased you during some lunch when you were having that and spoke about these technologies. But in the journey, when we had met, it was probably across the Indian ecosystem, like the Vedantas, the Aditya Birlas, the BPCLs, the Reliances. But the question of, hey, if someone is climbing on top of a scaffolding, doing unsafe activity, and the only way is for a human being to go and track that and say, hey, you're doing something that's unsafe, that's not a purely Indian problem. You have 6,000 deaths that happen on a daily basis in the industrial workforce, close to 2 million fatalities that happen a year, which is a massive, massive problem that the world is facing. So we started working with an international company in the form of Shell, where they proved this technology out starting from the US. And we can, of course, get into how the US started. But then we realized, coming to, again, on the previous discussion, how we spoke about market sizing, we realized energy sector, refining, for instance, India is just about 4% of the market. The US and the Middle East together consist close to 48 to 49% of the market. So we realized that the value for these technologies would be incredibly higher there. So India, as we scaled, we looked at it as the best test bed in the world, where you have tough customers, you have customers that can break the product, you can prove it till it breaks, and then take it over to the international market. And as a result, fast forward to today, the company and the technology is implemented in more than 20 countries across the world, saving lives globally in across more than 20 continents, or 20 countries right now. I hope that answered your question, though.
Yeah, it did,
Okay.
and thanks for taking me back to 2016. But I met Daniel, and he had set up this company when he was still doing his master's. So it's a great fillip to, or encouragement to any student entrepreneurs, and there are many of them that are and have come up over the last few years. But now that you've reached this point where you're probably split on revenues between India and US, roughly equal, what has been your understanding when you take or you're selling in Indian markets to Indian enterprise, the sales motion and the go-to-market there, versus as you start focusing on the US and picking up customers there, how different is the sales motion there? What is the go-to-market which is different there? Any learnings that you have for founders here?
Yeah, especially in our space, B2B enterprise, across all manufacturing sector, extremely different from what we understand. So I'll just give one example from each country, right? For example, over here, I think I went on a panel like this and spoke about how it's not good enough if the oil and gas industry just give grants to startups, but they need to test technologies, prove technologies, and only then there's value in the ecosystem, or else you'll fund startups that don't make any money, right? And in the process of that, I ended up meeting the director of refineries for BPCL, who said, what you're saying is absolutely right. Try this technology in one of my sites in Bharat refinery. I'll assemble everyone required for you to test the technology out. And if it works, I will scale it across BPCL. So it was a top-down push, happened pretty quickly. We deployed within 2 to 3 months. And today, it is one of our biggest customers, right? As simple as it is. It is very high-level relationship-driven, reputation-driven, and quick when you have leadership alignment. And customer success as well, we used to have what is called deployment managers that could take care of deployments, ensure that the cameras are connected, the AI system is working, and the output is coming to the customer. When we went to the US, we met one of the top men, one of the presidents of, let's say, one of the global majors over there. He said, I want the technology, but you'll have to convince everyone just under me, which was like 6 different departments. Then once we convinced those 6 different departments, they said, while you've convinced us, you have to go and convince the site as well. So go speak to the site leadership. And then we realized that there's a lot of power that's democratized across the organization, which means that you need to have an extremely sophisticated sales team, account executives that can really do end-to-end stakeholder management, from being able to speak to people working in the front line, on the ground, all the way to the executives, right? And not just on the sales side, there is a lot of investment that is required to be done on the customer success side. You make a mistake over here, the industry understands, and they say, okay, we made a mistake, this specific detection was not found, let's train your AI to make sure it is. Whereas if you make a similar mistake that has led to a liability out in the US, you're out of that logo forever. So as a result, the investment in customer success, the attention to customer, the kind of reports that you put out, there is an element of investment to put in there, which initially for early stage startups, it was heavily founder driven. But as we've raised close to 4 rounds of capital so far, we've been able to build structured teams that are able to take care of this and handle the local elements as well. Because when somewhere middle of the journey, we tried using pure India-based implementation teams or delivery teams to engage with customers where we saw that there were gaps there as well. So it's been an evolving journey where we've localized teams in Houston, in the Middle East, in Singapore, and in Europe to take care of the region as a whole.
Got it. So Indians are more tolerant and Indian customers are more tolerant than the US ones is my takeaway from this response of yours. But let me just shift to something that is now become important for investors as well, which is unit economics, right? And specifically when we think of that number called the gross margin, which is very different in a hardware play versus a software play. So Shibam, one of the things I've heard very often as an investor from founders who are sitting at low gross margins or lower gross margins is that, we'll scale and economies of scale will kick in and then there'll be margin expansion as a result of that. But that's not always the case. And do you feel, have you seen technology innovation, and in your case and over your journey, technology innovation actually lending to that margin expansion as opposed to just economies of scale? Has it been a mix of both? Can you talk through that a little bit, especially given it's harder in a hardware startup?
Sure. So let me probably put it this way, Ashwin. When we started like 2016, 2017, our gross margin was 10% lower than the industry average. And today we are at 5% higher than the industry average, right? So we moved like 15% in gross margin in the last, give or take 7-8 years. And it has been a continuous journey, right? Every year after year and after year, we'll have to continuously put that effort. Now, if you really ask me what is the weightage of margin improvement due to technological innovation or advancements, and what is the margin improvement due to, let's say, economies of scale, and probably there's a third lever, which is the margin improvement due to the brand. Because for us, the brand is also relevant. If you can get a higher price from the consumer, then you can also get a little bit more on that front, right? I will say more than 60% in the early years is because of technological innovation, right? So in fact, just to be honest, right, we were not the first one to launch BLDC motor fans, right? Before us, the BLDC motor fan was less than 1%, but there were someone who has done it, right, before us. Where we did well is we made sure that we continuously evolved the technology. We made it affordable. We made it more consumer-friendly. We made it more design-friendly, right? So I think, in the evolution of any technology, in the early years, it is technology-led margin improvement. Towards the end, once, let's say, for example, in BLDC motor, I will say, give or take, another 3 to 5 years of innovation is pending, right? So as we are becoming bigger and bigger and coming towards the end cycle of the technology development, now there, it's supply chain and the scale that kicks in, and also the brand and channel margin that kicks in. Early initial 6-7 years, it is largely the tech that has helped to improve that margin.
Got it. And all the big brands are now advertising BLDC motors, right? I think you all made it a little popular, and now others are, you see a lot of television ads on BLDC motor sort of fans, which are built on that. Daniel, did you have any similar margin-related experiences that you want to share?
Yeah, for us, it was largely very value-driven margins. For example, when we had our AI system working on inspections, right, where drones would do flights, the data from that would come into a central interface and the drone would give out the output. The value is, look, if I had to have an inspection person do that, it would cost me X lakhs. right? So if you're able to replace that time, you can charge a percentage of that X lakhs. Now, similarly, when we evolved that product to take care of safety and efficiency, we were saving money in the form of crores for these customers. And as a result, it wasn't really cost plus based pricing. It was a percentage of that value that we were charging. For us, the transformation happened when we shifted to the international market, because what was, let's say, 40, 50%, GMs would go to even 90, 95%. You're able to charge significantly higher because the cost associated with liabilities, with efficiency issues, much larger over there.
So the value you're delivering is higher, and therefore the cost.
Exactly, exactly. So that's really the only major change we've seen in our journey over the GM portion of it so far.
Okay, thanks. We're almost out of time, but maybe a one-word answer from both of you to a question. You have been called the Mercedes of the space by global customers, right? Some very large sovereign oil and gas companies have evaluated a ton of companies globally and called you the Mercedes of the space. I want to ask you, product build-out or sales and scaling up, which is harder in your mind? And especially given you're a deep tech product.
That's a great question. See, I have a bias. I'm an engineer that developed the product. So I would say the answer is definitely getting the GTM right, because it was a journey. And while developing the product, patenting it, being the first in the world has its difficulties, I would say ensuring that the GTM is perfect has been an evolving journey and continues to be one. So I would say the product build out is an easier portion of the journey.
Also because you're driving sales from the company at this point in time,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So you want to say, hey, I'm doing the tougher job. Shibam, how has it been? I mean, which of the two would you think has been harder? Getting it out in market, selling, versus early stages of product development, refinement. And I remember when we were talking, it was not just the BLDC motor, which is novel, but you're also thinking about, listen, fan design. Like, I've got to look better. I've got to be cooler. You're one of the few who came out with the remote control for a fan, and then the LED lights and so on. And it was, because it's a consumer product, a lot of the design aspects beyond just the motor aspects that was important. So having said that, product or selling it, which was harder in your experience or has been harder?
For us, which has been harder, I think everything was harder, but
I didn't bring fundraising into the question, otherwise you would have possibly said that.
Yeah, I think between these two, for us, in the early years, it was sales, which is always hard. And I mean, for a brand like us, consumer brand like us, now if I look at today, I think it's probably product differentiation that becomes hard as it becomes bigger and bigger, right? And the way I always think about sales and product, I mean, hard is one aspect. The other way I think about is, sales gives you lifeline, right? It will give you money, it will give you some time to buy, it will give you a lot of things to do experiments. And product gives you sustainability, right? So you'll have to have both. It's like two hands. You can't just have one. If you're very good sales, Baiju is a great example. The product is not good, then you'll fail. But yeah, I mean, I think we need to have both.
All right, thank you. I think we're out of time. I don't think we have time for questions, but appreciate both these gentlemen. One building deep tech in India for the world, the other building in deep tech in India for Indians, you and I. Thank you very much for being here and sharing your thoughts.